Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how inclusive are employer-provided plans, employer-provided retirement plans, brought to you by the Retirement and Disability Research Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We're happy to have you with us today. My name is Jonathan Ferguson. I'm a financial capability specialist with the Retirement and Disability Research Center. And today, we are going to focus on a project, learn about some research, very much centered in the title here today about employer retirement plans and how they serve people from various walks of life. So we'll have presentations on that research. And then we'll also have expanded discussion on implications of that research as well as it relates to policy and practice. Throughout the webinar today, you are able to submit questions to the Q&A box if you prefer. Just know that we will collect those questions and we will cover those during the question and answer portion towards the back half of today's webinar. So we'll have our presentations on the research and then on implications, and then we'll have a Q&A session as well, and you can feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar. Also note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be emailed to you by the end of the week, so you'll have access to it as well later on the week via the recording. All right, so moving on to our presenters. Today we have Dr. Andy Whitten, who is a financial economist in the Office of Tax Analysis at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. He earned a PhD in economics at Georgetown University, and his research covers a range of topics within household finance, public finance, as well as corporate finance. And then for our implications part of the presentation today, we're going to hear from Dr. Irina Stefanescu, who is a principal economist at the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. She is currently leading the Financial Intermediaries and Institutional Investors Group in the Research and Statistics Division. She joined the Federal Reserve Board in 2013 from Indiana University's Kelley School of Business, where she was an assistant professor of finance. While at the Federal Reserve Board, she joined the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development as a visiting research economist from 2017 to 2019. And before joining the Federal Reserve Board, she completed a PhD in finance at University of North Carolina's Kenan School of Business. Her main research interests are the intersection between asset management, corporate finance, and labor on pension-related issues. All right, so with that, we are going to join Andy for his part of the presentation. So I will stop sharing. And then Andy can take it over from there.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Jonathan. Appreciate the introduction.
Sure.
See if I can share the slides. All right, do you see the slides? I'll assume that you do.
Good to go.
Okay, great, cool. Okay, so yeah, thanks. So for anyone who missed it, my name's Andy Whitten, and I'm at the Treasury Department. This is joint work that I'm presenting today with Moto Yogo and Natalie Cox, both at Princeton. And today I'm giving my personal views, not those of the Treasury, the Social Security Administration, or any other government agency. And let's see, okay. So as Jonathan mentioned, the focus of today's talk is on understanding financial participation. And our research is motivated by the idea that an inclusive society should strive for the financial participation of all households, regardless of income or race. To date, what we know about this topic mainly comes from household surveys that have limitations that we're all familiar with, including small samples, a limited panel dimension, and potentially measurement error. So our study is going to bring the administrative tax data to bear on this topic and hope to improve our understanding of both retirement and bank account participation. We're going to be focused today on all U.S. households with a member in their 50s during the period 2015 to 19. So we're studying the extensive margin here. Do households have a retirement account? Do they have a bank account? You might separately be interested in the intensive margin. How much do people save in their retirement accounts? How much do they save in their bank accounts? We think both questions are interesting. However, it's difficult to measure the intensive margin in the tax data. So we focus on the extensive margin, which we think is independently interesting. And so there's a few reasons for that. One is that whether a household has a retirement or not can make a big difference in whether they can access matching contributions from an employer or indeed from the federal government. There's a tax credit called the Savers Credit that's available for all low-income households that functions like a matching contribution of 100% up to $2,000 of savings for joint filers and half that for singles. In addition, the extensive margin, do households have a retirement account or a bank account? From portfolio theory, we have this expectation that all households should optimally have some exposure to risky financial assets. And without these accounts, households are generally not getting that exposure. We also think, if we're in a world with behavioral biases where people struggle to save enough for retirement, simply the act of having an account, particularly one that has default or automatic contributions, can really cause households to save a lot more. And this is particularly important in the US context. As we know, the country has pretty severe wealth inequality here, more so even than income inequality. So to preview what our findings from the administrative tax data, we find that in 2019, our most recent year, in the bottom income quintile, only 21% of households have retirement accounts, and only 70% have bank accounts. We then look across the United States to see how geographic variation in financial participation correlates with observables, and we find a much stronger correlation with income more so than race. Third, we think about how to improve participation in retirement accounts, and we find a large causal effect of it just simply having access. So if more employers offered plans, we predict and estimate a large improvement in participation rates. And so in particular, in the fourth bullet here, we simulate a policy counterfactual of what if all employers were required to offer retirement plans to all employees. We predict that had that policy been in place, we could have improved participation in the bottom quintile by 17 percentage points. That is to say, in the bottom income quintile, 17% of households would have a retirement account as a result of such a policy. And we also find a large effect of 12 percentage points in the next income quintile. So as I mentioned, we're using the tax data here. This includes the universe of not only tax filings, tax returns like Form 1040 that individuals file each year, but also a slew of information returns that are filed by third parties like employers or fiduciaries. These data cover the entire US population, and again, we're focused on people in their 50s today. This is a critical period in the life cycle as folks are approaching retirement. And the tax data here have the same population count as the census effectively. We take individuals, but we also link them into households when they're married. So we can observe marriage through a joint filing of a tax return or a previous joint filing of a tax return, and we assume they stayed married if they continue living in the same address together. And one just note, today when I talk about income, what I mean is usual income, and more specifically, that is the average household income over a 5-year history. So this year and the previous 4 to kind of smooth out income fluctuation. All right, measuring retirement account participation in the tax data comes from 3 sources. One is the Form W-2, which employers file. This tells us for employees who are currently working, whether they participate in an employer retirement plan. This covers both defined contribution and defined benefit plans. For workers who are no longer working, we may observe retirement account participation through Form 1099-R if they take a distribution from their accounts like 401ks, 503bs, that sort of thing. We also see for every individual on Form 5498 whether or not they have an IRA. So this is something that anyone can contribute to so long as they have earned income, regardless of whether their employer offers a plan. To measure access to employer retirement plans, we look to the universe of W-2s issued by the same EIN. So you have an employer with a given EIN, we're going to look at all the W-2s they issued, including to people of any age. And if at least one of your coworkers has an employer plan, we're going to assume that you do too, so long as you meet a minimum income threshold, which is 1,000 hours times the minimum wage. So roughly half time at minimum wage. So for bank account participation in the tax data, we measure this largely through paying your taxes from a bank account or receiving a refund into your bank account. So this happens at the tax filing. There's a few others that we pick up through Form 1099 int, but that is less important for us. So it's mostly coming from the tax filings. Now for each of these measures, it's not sufficient to use 1 year of tax data to measure them because in a given year, you might not see a W-2, you might not see a distribution from the retirement account, the taxpayer might not file returns in any one given year. So for each of these, we use a 10-year history to fill that gap. And when we do that, we get nearly all taxpayers filing at least one return over that period. So turning to the results, here is a table showing in the tax data in panel A and in panel B for comparison, the survey of consumer finances, the incidence of retirement account participation. So at the far right, the column says all, that says that in the administrative tax data, around 70% of households have a retirement account. In panel B, in the survey consumer finances, we also see about 70%. It's a little noisier there with the smaller samples, but we take this as reassuring that we're measuring the same overall general concept here. We've also shown in the first 5 columns how this breaks out across the income distribution. So these are the 5 quintiles of usual income. And here we find a little bit steeper gradient in the tax data. So at the very top, households are slightly more likely to have retirement accounts compared to the SCF. And at the bottom, households are less likely in the tax data to have a retirement account compared to the SCF, where participation rates you see here are 24 or 33%, depending on the year. So for us, it's 21%. Now this table shows this analogous thing, but for bank account participation. So again, our overall rates on the far right column are 92%. So overall, about 92% of households have a bank account. This compares pretty similarly to the SCF rates, 93 or 95%. And once again, we also observe a little bit steeper income gradient in the tax data. And in particular, in the bottom quintile, we find only 70% of households have a bank account compared to more like 76 or 80 in the SCF. So turning to the geographic variation, one thing that is an advantage of having the population here is that we can do some pretty fine geographic analysis. And so in what follows, I'm going to show you how participation varies across zip code tabulation areas, or ZICTAs. These are statistical areas developed by the Census Bureau. They're kind of like a zip code. They're a little bit larger. And so this is the unit we're going to use here to analyze. We're going to map the zip codes to ZICTAs in the tax data, and then we're going to also match that with some data from the American Community Survey on population and racial composition, as well as some data from FDIC on local bank branch access. So here's a map showing what retirement account participation looks like in the bottom income quintile across ZICTAs. In this map, the yellow color indicates a high participation rate with between 40 to 100% of households in those ZICTAs having retirement accounts. In the red, we have low participation rates where between 0 to 10% of households have retirement accounts. And this is, again, among those in the bottom income quintile, where we have the most variation. And also the darker the color, the more populous the area in this graph. And so the main thing I want you to take away from this is just that the variation that we see here is very local. We're not seeing broad patterns of one region where people are doing really well, having lots of retirement accounts, one region where they're not. Instead, there's lots of variation even within commuting zones, within states. And so there's that fine local variation to explore here. So to do that, we're going to consider three potential explanatory variables to help understand this variation. One is the racial composition of the ZICTA. Second is the income level. And third is the access to banks. So this is where we bring in the FDIC, and this particularly for bank account participation. There's been other research finding an effect of higher participation when you have bank branches nearby. So what I'm showing here then is a regression output where the unit of observation is the ZICTA. The outcome variable is the share of households, again with a member in their 50s, who have a retirement account. In the first column, we run the regression purely on the racial composition of the ZICTA to get the unconditional correlations there. And so, for example, the coefficient of negative 0.37 for Hispanic tells us that when the Hispanic population share increases by 1 percentage point relative to the white population share in a ZICTA, we see retirement account participation decline by 37 basis points. And this could be a combination of Hispanic households being less likely than white households to have retirement accounts, or if your neighbor is Hispanic, then you are less likely to have retirement accounts. So those are both kind of included here because we run this at the ZICTA level. We see also a strong negative effect for the Black share, suggesting that those households likely have much lower participation rates as well. In column 2, then now we consider the unconditional correlation with income. We find, as expected, a strong positive effect. The more income in a ZICTA, the more likely they are to have a retirement account. And in column 3, then we combine these and sort of test to see which is the stronger predictor. When we do so, we see the effect on income maintaining a strong positive coefficient, while the coefficients on race fall dramatically. So if, in particular, like the Black coefficient falls from negative 30 basis points to negative 6. And moreover, if you look at the R-squared values in columns 1 and 2, we see that income alone is able to predict 80% of the variation across ZICTAs in retirement account participation, while race predicts comparatively less. So overall, the evidence here points towards income being a stronger predictor than race. Finally, in column 4, we add commuting zone fixed effects. And when we do so, our coefficients are largely unchanged. And so we interpret this as evidence that the correlations that we're seeing in column 3 are really about that local variation I was talking about that's happening within commuting zones, as opposed to broader patterns across the US. So in this table, now we do the same thing for bank account participation, essentially. So here the outcome variable is the share of the ZICTA that has a bank account. In column 1, we see the unconditional correlation with race. We see that minorities, or the greater the minority share of a neighborhood, the lower the bank account participation. So again, this is some mixture of own race and potentially spillover effects onto neighbors. And again, in column 2, we see the unconditional correlation with income, and again, a strong positive effect with higher income areas being more likely to have bank accounts as expected. In column 3, now we test for an additional channel, which is the bank branch density in the neighborhoods. This is the number of bank branches per 1,000 people in the ZICTA. And we get a precise 0 effect here with an R-squared of exactly 0, or rounded to 0. And so curiously, in our data, we're not seeing this kind of standard result of bank branches mattering here. In column 4, now we include all our predictor covariates, and when we do so, The coefficient on income remains large and strong. The coefficients on bank branch remain 0. And the coefficients on race this time fall essentially to 0. And so once you condition on income, there is effectively no correlation between race and bank account participation. And this is also bolstered by the R-squared values again in columns 1 and 2, where column 2 income explains 82% of the variation in bank account participation. Finally, in column 5, again, once we add commuting zone fixed effects, the story remains largely the same. And so again, in the context of bank accounts, we see, I didn't show you today, but the map looks quite similar in terms of the local variation happening there. So we find this strong correlation with income, with both bank account and retirement account participation. This is as expected. There's several sort of obvious direct channels of income that could affect things here, including households that have low income might just not have enough income to save. Also, we know that households with low income face a greater friction in the form of banking fees where, they charge fees for households with low balances. This tends to affect lower income households more, of course. And, while we do have tax incentives for retirement at all income levels, I think our results are showing that these are not sufficient at the lowest incomes to encourage participation. There's also a couple more subtle ways that income might be driving the results here. So there's some evidence that lower income households have less financial literacy. And so that might be driving some of the correlation that we see here. And there also could be peer effects in terms of income where, if you socialize with your neighbors who are high income and they have retirement accounts or bank accounts, then that could spill over into your participation as well. And we think that these would both be interesting channels to explore further. So I'm going to skip over this section in the interest of time. And for the remainder, I'm going to spend on how we can boost retirement account participation. So here we're starting with just basic facts of measuring access to employer retirement account plans. So this is just, are you working and does your employer offer you a plan? We see that in the top income quintiles, access to employer retirement plans is near universal. However, particularly in the very bottom quintile, access really drops off. So only 38% of households in the bottom quintile have access to an employer retirement plan in the tax data. So this, naturally prompts the question of, okay, if we could improve this access, could we improve participation? And so we seek to estimate that causal relationship. Again, like if we can get more employers to offer plans, can we improve retirement account participation? So the idea basically in the regression is to regress retirement account participation on a measure of access to an employer retirement plan. We're going to consider 3 characteristics of access. Do you have an employer plan at all? How many years do you have access to an employer plan across the previous 10-year history? And does your plan offer automatic enrollment? Now, we can't do the naive thing here and just run that regression as I just described because of the endogeneity problem. So what I mean here is that workers who the story we have in mind is a worker, strongly desires to save for retirement, and that's exactly the sort of worker who chooses to work for an employer who offers a plan. Perhaps they really value that, right? So if we have this kind of endogenous selection and sorting, then if we just regress retirement account participation on access, we'll get this correlation that's not really a causal effect. It's this sorting behavior. So we need to find a way to solve this empirically. And we tackle this challenge with instrumental variables. We begin with the sample of 50-year-olds in 2019 who did not have access to an employer plan in 2010. So we condition on that sorting that's happening in 2010. So we start with a group that doesn't have access and our identifying assumption. So we're going to use variation in among that set of employers that didn't offer a plan in 2010, some of them subsequently will, and some of them won't. Our identifying assumption here is that workers aren't able to predict that, right? So workers didn't soar into their 2010 employer on the expectation of whether they would offer a retirement plan in the next 10 years. This gives us an intent to treat instrument where the instrumental variable is the access to an employer plan that an employee would have had in the counterfactual scenario where they stayed with the same employer from 2011 to 2019. And I'm going to illustrate this in a diagram. So this considers two workers. In the top worker, so both these workers work for employer A in 2010. Both of them did not have access in 2010. This is why we have the 0 for 2010 here. The top worker just stays with employer A the whole time. Employer A offers a plan beginning in 2016. And so their actual access is 0 until 2016 and 1 thereafter. The second worker below switched employers. So this worker switches in 2013 to employer B, who has a plan offered at that time. So this worker has 3 years without access and then 7 with access. So crucially, they're both going to get the same instrument here, which is, again, the access that they would have had they stayed with employer A. Of course, for the top worker, this is what they did, and so their instrument exactly matches their actual access. For the worker below, however, the instrument only turns on right in 2016. And so in this way, we hope to identify the part of that worker's access that was as good as random, right? Assuming that they couldn't predict that employer A was going to offer a plan in 2016. The fact that they switched in 2013, perhaps like to an employer exactly because they offered a plan, won't show up in the identifying variation under the instrumental variable strategy. So turning to the second stage results here, we've done this for 5 groups based on income quintiles to see heterogeneous effects across the income distribution. So again, our sample here is conditional on not having access in 2010. And so if you look at the observation count at the bottom, even though we've split people into income quintiles, the observation count is not the same across the quintiles. And that's exactly because households in the bottom quintile are more likely to be in that group that did not have access in 2010. Nonetheless, even in the top income quintile, we get plenty of observations that did not have access in 2010. Interpreting these coefficients then, so let's focus on the 0.15 number on the top left. This says for the bottom income quintile, we estimate that simply having 1 year of access to an employer plan improves retirement account participation by 15 percentage points. If we look down to automatic enrollment, we see an effect of 34 percentage points. So we can add these. So so the 15% is just access to any employer plan that does not have automatic enrollment. If we give access instead to a plan that does have automatic enrollment, we get an effect of 15 plus 34 or 49 percentage point increase in participation. So, huge effects. We also see that the number of years of access matters, with more years improving participation by 4% or 4 percentage points. And so interestingly, too, you can compare the automatic enrollment with the number of years of access. We find that having default enrollment in the bottom income quintile has the same effect as 8 additional years of access to a plan without automatic enrollment. So a very strong effect of automatic enrollment, consistent with some other work in the literature. Looking across the income distribution, if we look at the top quintile, we see that access to an employer plan plays an even larger role if we're talking about access to a plan without automatic enrollment, right? So there we can improve participation by 31%, or percentage points rather. However, if you look at the coefficient on automatic enrollment, it's only 5 percentage points. And so while the top income quintile responds more to a plan that doesn't have automatic enrollment, it's the opposite for a plan that does have enrollment. If we give a plan with automatic enrollment, then we get a larger treatment effect in the bottom income quintile compared to the top quintile. And so this is consistent with a story where households at the top have a stronger desire or ability to save for retirement. And so just giving them access is sufficient to get them into their 401k. They'll take up the matching contributions, whereas households at the bottom participate more passively, and the default option here really matters. And if we default them into enrollment, then we get significantly more participation. One other point about this is that the constant term here is itself interesting. So this tells us what participation would be in the absence of an employer plan. So no auto enroll, just no plan, no access, no employer access for these households. Of course, they could still save through an IRA or perhaps through an employer plan that they had more than 10 years ago. And the constant term says what that participation would be. In the bottom income quintile, it's only 7%, whereas in the top quintile, it's 61%. And this is part of why the overall treatment effect is larger in the bottom quintile. There's more room for participation to increase. All right, so with these estimates in hand, we can simulate a policy counterfactual of what would happen if more employers offered plans. So currently there are 10 states that mandate that employers of a certain size enroll all their workers in either an employer plan or a state-sponsored retirement plan. And these all have default contributions, so automatic enrollment. And with our IB estimates, we can estimate the long-run effects of these. So here I'm showing you what those plans look like. They really, the first one to come online was Oregon in 2017. So this is fairly recent stuff and really ripe for researchers to study. We simulate what would happen if we had a similar thing nationwide. And to be clear, because we have this 10-year history of access, the counterfactual here is over the last 10 years, what if the US had in place a policy where all employers were mandated to offer retirement account plans? We predict that had that been in place, we could improve participation among households in the bottom quintile by 37 percentage points. By 17 percentage points, from 21%, which is the current number, up to 37%. So a substantial improvement, also not an improvement that gets us all the way up to 100%. And so, this can get us part of the way there, but we're going to need other policy solutions if we want to get that number higher than that. And I'm getting short on time, so I'll summarize here. So one policy implication of our work is that, as I mentioned, the tax incentives to participate in these plans appear to be insufficient for low-income households. And this is consistent with other work that finds that the saver's credit has a limited impact. And we find that these employer mandates could have a larger effect. So to conclude, we've documented that there's substantial inequality in financial participation and in access to employer retirement plans across the income distribution. We found that if we could improve access to employer plans, we could improve participation rates. And I'll just note that we have placed some interactive maps online that anyone can use to zoom in on their area to find out where participation rates are low and perhaps in need of addressing. We hope that financial service firms, fintech, government, et cetera, can use these tools to help improve participation. All right, and with that, I will turn it over to Irina. So thank you very much for your attention. Irina, thank you very much for your comments in advance. And I look forward to the discussion later.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you for inviting me to discuss this paper. I really enjoyed it. So let me try to share my screen first. So this was an amazing read. It really fits with my research, and I'm very much interested in this topic. Before I start, as Andy did, I need to have a disclaimer because I'm an employee of the Federal Reserve Board. So the views expressed in this discussion are mine and not those of the Federal Reserve. So let me start by discussing, why I really like this paper. The first thing is that it provides an important contribution to the literature on wealth inequality. Basically, the paper examines how geographic variation and financial participation relates to racial composition, to average income, and access to financial services. Second, this paper provides a comprehensive study on retirement and bank account participation, whereas previous research has focused on smaller survey responses. Whereas the outcome or the takeaway from the surveys was very similar. Financial participation, it's lower for low income and non-white households. This survey data is generally incomplete. This survey data is typically done in small samples. You have to deal with a limited panel and also deal with some measurement error. Third, the paper, the data included in this paper, put together in this paper, it's amazing in terms of richness. It includes individual level data on income, wealth, access to retirement, bank account, and participation. And it's a significant data effort. It was very impressive on this dimension. I don't think that Andy emphasized it that much. I was amazed by the number of data sets that were actually linked together, knowing how complicated this process is. Finally, but equally important, if not even more important than anything else, I think this paper has very strong implications for policy setting. A quick outline. I'm going to talk a little bit about data, a little bit about the findings, and then I'm going to discuss the mechanism and also the contribution. And in this context, I'm going to provide some comments and some ideas for extensions. So in terms of the data, the authors are putting together a great data, as I said. The data set, the panel data is constructed from administrative tax data at the individual level. So they sort individuals based on age, and they mostly focus on the group of individuals that are from 50 to 59-year-olds. And I agree. This sample, this subsample, includes the individuals that are in the most important part of their life cycle in terms of retirement. So definitely a lot of focus should be put on this group. And then they sort these individuals based on income, and they put them into 5 buckets practically based on income, and they pay a particular attention to the lowest income group because it has the greatest variation in terms of financial participation. It's a really big data effort. Again, I don't think this is emphasized enough. So it starts with an IRS tax data set, which is matched with a survey of consumer finance, which is survey-based. So it fits very well with what we've seen in survey data. This data set at the individual level, then it's matched with census, zip codes, it's matched with employer level data. This is the Form 5500 data that it's filed with the Department of Labor and IRS. It puts together information from the American Community Survey, and then it adds information from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation for bank branches. It puts together an impressive data set on income and then on retirement variables. And just focusing on the lowest income, what they find is that 21% of the individuals have a retirement account, 70% have bank accounts, and 38% have access to a retirement account. So the question is, why do we see heterogeneity in financial participation for for the lowest income group? And the question is split into two. The authors is going 2 ways about this. So first, he looks at geography, and that includes race. And then he looks at access to see how this to affect participation into retirement plans, or to, or which variables affect bank participation. Starting with the impact on geography, they find a very important result. Their main result, I think, in the paper is that income is the strongest predictor of financial participation. And and how do they do this? They aggregate the information of basically at the zip code level, the way I understand it, from the information that they collect from census. They practically test whether retirement participation is correlated with race, and then sequentially by race, by income, and then by commuting zones. And what they find is that race actually it's negatively correlated with retirement participation, and average log income as well in those first two columns. But when we add them together, what comes out very significantly, very importantly, is that income, it's a very strong predictor of financial participation, and the other variables, the other coefficient on race actually become slightly smaller and less important. They do a similar exercise for bank account participation. They find that bank account participation is negatively correlated with Hispanic and Black population shares, but these correlations actually disappear once we add income as an explanatory variable. So after concluding that geography plays a relatively smaller role in the question that they examine, they ask whether the lowest income group actually has access to a retirement account. So this is a very important question, because if participants do not have, individuals do not have access to a retirement account, of course they cannot participate. So and in dealing with this problem, in trying to isolate the effect of access and participations, of course, they have to worry about endogeneity, as Andy pointed out, as individuals may very well choose to work with employers that offer retirement accounts. And to deal with this, they use a very clever instrument, and very nicely explained by Andy in the presentation. They use an intention to treat instrument, and they do this exercise on the group of participants of individuals that did not have a retirement account in 2010. So they're able basically to single out the impact of access on participation. And this is a table that, of course, Andy showed as well in the presentation. It's a very important table in the paper. It's a second stage of the instrumental variable regression, where actually we can say something about the size of this effect. So basically, retirement account participation is on the left-hand side, and then as explanatory variable, they include access to employer plan, additional years of access, automatic enrollment. And what they find is that for the lowest quintile, for instance, access to the employment plan increases participation by 15 percentage points. Our auto enrollment increases participation by 34 percentage points. And additional years of access increase participation by another 4 percentage points. So overall, basically, what they conclude is that universal access with automatic enrollment could increase retirement account participation by 17 percentage points in the lowest income quintiles over 10 years. This is an important result, and this is, a very important policy implication. I really like this table. So now moving ahead in terms of comments, I mean, we worried about access. Obviously, this is a very important component that links income to participation. But why do low income groups have a lower access to retirement plans? That's kind of the next question that pops in my head. You know, why is this the case? And in this particular setup, I mean, looking at the table at the bottom from the paper, it looks like the lowest income group from 0 to 20%, the access is about 42%, whereas in the higher income group, the access is about 96%, a very striking difference. So I could not help myself not to wonder whether this is an industry effect, for instance. Maybe low income earners, individuals, maybe they work in certain industries where there is a very high turnover and where these plans, these retirement plans are not offered. Similarly, maybe in these industries, there are no unions. Maybe they have no bargaining power to request, retirement plans in the first place. And we could also think about geography here because Andy has clearly singled out the link, the geography link between income and participation. But there could be a geographic link between income and access as well. Maybe certain, if we split the data by race, we observe interesting patterns in terms of access as well. In terms of so far, the paper has looked at the connection between income, access, and participation. But maybe we should go back one more step and maybe ask why is income low for this group in the first place? And one consideration is education. Is education maybe driving income and then maybe possibly work opportunities? Maybe education is the driver of this low income group that we have been looking at. And this slides comes from one of my research papers where we collect data from census and we plot income and education at the zip code level. And the red areas correspond to high income, high education areas, and the lighter ones to low income, low education. And it's very clear that the two are quite correlated with each other just by looking at the snapshot. This is again coming from census data. Another extension, so this goes to the back end of the argument. Right? So education maybe drives income leads you to work in an industry for an employer that gives you access or not, and then you choose as an individual whether to participate or not. But then the last link, after you participate in the retirement plan, then you may have the option to invest and to choose investment choices. For instance, in a 401k plan, you are given a list of investments if you are not enrolled automatically in one of them, and you can choose among the set of, say, mutual fund options that are offered to you, and you may make actually a very poor choice if you are not, in the financial. You don't have an education necessarily in finance, say. We also know from previous research that individuals could lose a lot of money at retirement just by making small mistakes in terms of investing their retirement money during their lifetime. So I would add this maybe as a potential extension as a paper, and also may include some information about the financial literacy of the individuals, who choose to participate in retirement accounts. Because I understand from reading the paper that the IRS data only allows or only provides information that from IRS data that there are investments into stocks and mutual funds outside retirement accounts that Andy and the other authors could use to kind of estimate financial literacy for this group. So it's limited to this particular group in the data, but it still may lead to some very interesting results and policy implications if it's carried out one step further into investments. So I'm gonna just briefly bring up a little bit of my work here because I've been working on the investments, the individual investments, or in 401k plans. I've done a lot of work in this area, and just quickly kind of highlight some of the pieces that I've been discussing so far: education and outcomes, investment choices. In a regression that we have been recently looking at the 401k plan level, we calculate average adjusted fees, how much individuals, participants in 401k pay in terms of fees to mutual fund families or to the administrator. And we run a regression of these average fees on income per capita and on education. We do this separately in columns 1 and 2, and then we also do it together in column 3, in the column 3 of this table. And while income and education seem to separately affect the fees, the average fees that participants pay in 401k plans, when we put them together, what prevails is actually education more so than income. So if you could carry the contribution a little bit farther into, how this money is invested, there could be more nuance to the interpretation and possibly new policy implications. Finally, and this is the last slide, I think the paper is great, and I've learned a lot, and it has a great contribution. I would maybe try to push it maybe even farther in terms of contribution by expanding the data. I know that the paper focused on the individuals that are very close to the retirement, 50 to 59-year-olds, but I think there is quite a bit we can learn from the other groups as well. And I wonder whether the current tax incentives, for instance, that are maximized by high income earners, magnify the wealth inequality because they end up maximizing their, retirement contributions, and that accumulates over time, and it kind of could magnify wealth inequality. Now, the next comment, it's possibly difficult to do, but it would be very, very interesting. The low-income group is likely further away from reaching enough savings for retirement. We already implicitly understood this from this paper and from the literature. So given the richness of the data that you have access to, could you calculate maybe what are the adequate retirement savings at retirement for the participants, for the individuals in the data set? Because the data set includes information on income, on savings, possibly you can estimate consumption. If you have consumption close to retirement, you can calculate the present value of consumption at retirement, and then combine this with contributions that have been made by the individual over time to retirement accounts. Maybe one could actually come up with a back of the envelope calculation on how big the gap is at the individual level. And this has been really hard to do in the US because we generally don't have individual level data. It has been done successfully, I guess, in other Scandinavian countries where there is more data at the individual level, but I think in terms of research here, there is more to do. And final thing, I know that since the paper is looking at wealth inequality, which we know that it's greater than income inequality, would it be better maybe to try to create wealth quintiles in this analysis, if possible. I know that this may be a stretch given the amount of the quality or the type of data that you have access, but this also would be very useful and would add to the contribution. So to conclude, I very much enjoyed the paper. Great exercise, a lot of work. It's very carefully done. And I think as a takeaway, the authors could strengthen the contribution by maybe investigating possibly the role of education, the role of financial literacy, and how possibly the retirement money is saved at the ends of those connections that you already made in the paper. So thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Irina. That was great. Great detail, great review of Andy's group's work. And Andy, I'll welcome you back on. We just have a few minutes left, but I did want to ask a few questions before we hop off in just about 3 or 4 minutes. So sorry to rush you along, but just a few questions I thought I'd ask. So two big picture ones. So previously, in the last 30, 40 years, we've seen a tremendous shift, obviously, from pensions to defined contribution plans. And oftentimes when I'm talking with folks about things like this, they kind of harken back to, well, things were so much better back in the pension days. And so I'm curious about the work that your team did here, Andy. Might that be true or not as it relates to this topic in terms of access, considering income seems to be such a big deal related to what you found? Do you have any thoughts on whether or not that might be true or not, or to what level? And I know that wasn't a part of your research. I just thought I'd ask
Yeah,
because I always
no,
hear that
it,
statement.
it's a great point. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about that, just because of our timeline here. We can't go too far back with the tax data before we lose coverage of the full population. So we do have, 2015 and 2019, which is, almost enough if you squint hard enough to see a time series effect. And when we do see declining access. So that is consistent with this story that we all know that DB plans are less common today than they were in the past. I think, DB plans are often automatically enrolling. So, to the extent we have large causal effects of auto enroll, I think that's also consistent with the story that you're positing. Yeah, it's hard for us to distinguish in the data between DB and DC plans. We really just see on the W-2 whether you're covered by a plan. So there's, it's tough for us to make a lot of headway on that.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, I know that was a tough one, but I figured I'd give it a shot, see what we landed on. And I guess my last question, maybe Irina, you can share any thoughts on this, which is more about current day, considering our times of, in my opinion, high polarization. We don't have very many bipartisan efforts nearly as large as or possibly impactful as the Secure Acts, both 1.0 and 2.0. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how that legislation could relate to any of the discussion here today. Do you see that improving things? Not? Maybe so, maybe not. And then we'll conclude on that. So Irina, you get the last word in that time.
Yes, I don't think we have the last word on the impact of legislation on this polarization that you're talking about. I think there is a lot of ongoing research, and the results are yet to be come. I think, but it's great that there is more interest in this area, and the fact that this started to be documented, geographically, and quantified in the way that Andy did it in his paper, have numbers at hand to kind of point to geographical areas, to access financial literacy. I think that we have we have tools now, and there is a lot of interest in learning more about this. I don't think that the current legislation, the effect of this legislation is, yet visible, in my view. But I haven't done research particularly focusing on it, to be entirely honest. So in my research, I mostly focus on 401k plans, although with some defined benefit plans. And I really like the comment about the transition towards 401k plans and the fact that we're losing this automatic enrollment when we move towards 401k plans. But that transition creates a lots of other conflicts and issues that we have to think about, because it's not very clear that participants are fully equipped to deal with the choices, in 401k plans. I think there are too many intermediaries at stake, too many decisions, too much polarization, even from the side of the employers as well. So they may choose menus, 401k menus, investment menus for individuals that may reflect their own choices, their own views, their own preferences at the end of the day. So I think this is an area that definitely deserves a lot more attention, I think, in the years to come.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things your answer pointed out was this trending shift to defined contribution plans does, in a lot of ways, necessitate greater literacy, greater education compared to what the previous situation was. And so we really need to focus on that issue as much as almost any of the legislation and all the other things. We can have all the access we want, but if the plans require a certain level of education or literacy to opt into, because there isn't that automatic enrollment, then we're going to keep running against some of the same challenges. Okay, so thank you all for that. I know we're a little over. I want to thank again Andy and Irina for being here today, and for those who have joined us. As a reminder, this has been recorded, and you will be able to get a copy of it via your email by the end of the week. Otherwise, thanks again to our presenters, and I hope everyone has a fantastic day. Bye-bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Great, and thank you for inviting me, and thanks, Irina, for your comments. Really appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Take care.
All right, have a good day, everyone.